Welcome to a Rice University podcast. For more information about us, please visit our website at www.rice.edu.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Susan McIntosh. I'm Director of Scientia, and I'm very glad to see you all here for this colloquium in our continuing series on Rice, A Century of Change. Today we're focusing on an amazing success story, namely the Shepard School of Music and its rise from a small fledgling program in the 1970s to its current place among the most eminent music schools in the country. I have a very soft spot in my heart for the Shepard School, not only because one of its former deans, Michael Hammond, was a member of Scientia's executive board for a number of years, but also because when I first came to Rice in 1981, the Shepard School was housed partly on the first floor of Sewell Hall, where I had my office. And I often worked in my office in the evenings, which was the time when the ensembles met. So through my vent came an unending succession of string quartets and piano trios. And it was a constant delight and a very special atmosphere for which I still feel tremendous nostalgia. And it's astounding to contemplate that from those humble but highly aspirational beginnings, the Shepard School has joined the ranks of the top 20 music schools in this country out of over 900, whose graduates comprise 80% of the country's professional musicians. So to recount this success story and its very beginnings, we are fortunate today to have one of the Shepard School's original faculty members from 1974. Anne Schnoebelen served for many years as chair of the musicology department and twice as interim dean. She is the Mullen Professor Emerita of Musicology in the Shepard School and specializes in Italian sacred music of the 17th and 18th centuries. Her publications include Padre Martini's collection of letters in the Civico Museo Bibliografico Musicale, an annotated index, which contains synopses of more than 6,000 letters from musicians in the 18th century to this composer, pedagogue, and music historian. She edited 10 volumes of the Masses in the series 17th Century Italian Sacred Music, for which she's also the general editor, a volume of cantatas by Maurizio Casati in the series The Italian Cantata, and 10 volumes of solo motets in the series Solo Motets from the 17th century. She's just completed an online bibliography of Italian prints of the Mass and Office from 1520 to 1750 with colleague Jeffrey Kurtzman, to be published online in the Journal of 17th Century Music. So please join me in welcoming Anne Schnoebelen, speaking on Sally's gift to the Shepard School of Music.
Thank you, thank you. It is a great pleasure and honor to be invited to speak here today about the Shepard School of Music, my home at Rice. Is that okay? Yeah, my home at Rice for 31 years. Those who thrill to the splendid concerts and recitals presented by faculty and students might wonder about its name, origins, and early history. Due to the munificence of the Shepard family, of which Benjamin A. Shepard was the patriarch, and the desire of his musical granddaughter, Sally Shepard Perkins, to honor him, Rice University now has one of the leading music schools in the nation. But the journey between its modest beginning and today was not always an easy one. This afternoon, with the help of some archival materials and my own recollections as one of the original faculty members, I hope to chronicle some of its history, problems, and successes. First, a verbal footnote. My research for the first part of this talk was originally done for an article in The Cornerstone for winter 2007. This is the newsletter of the Rice Historical Society. In the same issue is an article by Samuel Jones, which I drew on as well. Benjamin Armistead Shepard according to a document entitled The Transplanted Virginian, written by Sally Shepard Perkins, was born May 14, 1814, at a Virginia home called Lawton in Fluvanna County, Virginia. He was next to the youngest in a faculty of 14 children. His Anglo-Saxon ancestors had been given large grants of land by the crown, but the land was poor and the family fortunes quickly diminished. Benjamin left Virginia in 1833 to seek other opportunities, stopping for a time in Nashville and then New Orleans. He arrived in Galveston in 1840, where he met and married Mary Hobson of Tennessee. In 1841, the couple established themselves in Houston, where Benjamin became one of the city's founding fathers and a friend of General Sam Houston. Recognized as the pioneer banker of Texas, he was the founder of the First National Bank in Houston. A touching story from the same document by Sally is worth quoting in full because it indicates the innate love of music in the Shepard family. When I was a tiny tot, there is a tradition that I ran and got Grandfather Shepard my baby pillow as I saw him dozing in the chair. It is a gratifying thought that I could do something for him who bestowed so many benefits on me. And on this same visit to us at Palmyra, Virginia, I played for him on my toy piano. He is said to have remarked, "That child has got to go to Leipzig." No doubt his reference was to Leipzig's famous Hochschule für Musik, founded by Mendelssohn in 1843, one of the leading music conservatories of the late 19th century. Sally, however, did not go to Leipzig, but graduated in music from Hollins College in Virginia, majoring in piano studies. Music was a large part of her entire life. She presided over the music clubs of Virginia for 3 years, 1922 to 25, and became a leader in the National Federation of Music Clubs. Her musical talent found its greatest expression in her gift to Rice University, then Rice Institute, in 1950 for a school of music which she called purely a product of my own mind and heart. The healing powers of music are so much needed in this troubled world, and I earnestly hope our Southland will be enriched when my dream becomes a reality. The Shepard School of Music was dedicated to the glory of God and in memory of my grandfather and my branch of his family. The initial gift of Sally Shepard Perkins and her husband, Malcolm W. Perkins, was $350,000. Made on December 2nd, 1950. In the deed of gift, she acknowledges her debt to her grandfather, grateful for his encouraging her in the study of music. "It seems to me fitting," she said, "therefore, that I should establish this school of music at Houston, where her grandfather reared his family and resided until his death. Furthermore," she says, "it also seems to me fitting that the buildings which house this school should perpetuate in Houston the early colonial type of architecture found in Virginia, as a reminder of this and other sons of the Old Dominion who contributed much to the development of Texas. I therefore direct that said school should be housed in a group of buildings of the early colonial type of architecture, 2 of which shall be modeled respectively after Crozet House, an historical dwelling in downtown Richmond, Virginia, and the house I own at 2609 Monument Avenue in Richmond, Virginia, which is a perfect example of early Georgian architecture." However, evidently being a practical woman, she goes on to say, "I fully realize, however, that the style and architecture of the buildings of this school must be adapted to that of the other buildings located and those planned on the campus of the Institute, and I leave the final determination of this to the trustees of the Institute, having full confidence that they will observe my wishes as far as practical." She also required that any design plans be shown to her or her surviving relatives, that recognition be given to the interest in music of herself and her husband, and that a memorial be established to her grandparents, Benjamin Armistead Shepard and Mary Hobson Shepard. The stipulation for colonial architecture may come as a surprise to those who have experienced the present home of the Shepard School, dedicated on October 4th, 1991, 41 years after the original gift was made. But it was too soon in 1950 to be concerned about the style of the buildings. It was clear from the start that monies would not be sufficient to initiate the new School of Music for some time. Mrs. Perkins added to the gift throughout her lifetime until it totaled a little over $1 million. But only upon her death in 1968 and her bequest of $4.5 million would it be possible to plan seriously for the Shepard School. There were, however, lectures presented by the Shepard Foundation, also specified in the early documents, during these early years by such musical luminaries as Howard Hanson, composer and director of the Eastman School of Music, and concerts by local chamber music groups and outside artists. Professor Arthur S. Hall, a composer and leader of the musical activities at Christ Church Cathedral, was brought to Rice in 1953 to oversee the development of what was then the Department of Music. He offered some courses in music history and music theory and established 2 glee clubs, one for men and one for women. These groups were the seed of the Rice Chorale, the longest existing musical group at Rice, now conducted by Professor Tom Jaber. The department then also included an organist, Klaus Krotzenstein. Ann Holmes, fine arts editor for the Houston Chronicle, wrote on March 24, 1954, Mr. Hall's lectures on music avoid the cliché, that dilettante aspect called appreciation. This so often implies an outside coating of culture and a smattering of ignorance. The Rice music lectures, by contrast, approach the subject scientifically. It is believed that if the minds of these young scholars may be led to understand the architectural structures, the scientific theories of music, real appreciation follows. This was a philosophy that would characterize the school later on as well, and still does. In 1962, Mr. and Mrs. Perkins made an additional gift to the Shepard School Endowment of some property on Calhoun Avenue between Travis and Milam. The gift seems to have inspired serious discussion about the nature of the Shepard School and its location on the campus. Chancellor Carrie Kronas wrote a draft of suggested proposals for the school dated April 10, 1962, based on suggestions supplied by Dean W.H. Masterson and Professor Hall. It is clear to us that we should model the Shepard School after the Yale School of Music. That is, we probably should not go into the applied music field in any very extensive fashion. Most of our music students will, of course, possess some instrumental or vocal aptitudes, and a certain amount of instruction will be required in those fields. Music, if not most of the training desired, however, probably could be provided advantageously through a cooperative arrangement with the University of Houston, which does have a professional school of music. Various other questions were raised in this document, including the amount of endowment needed before the erection of a building, the size of the faculty, whether to have one building or 2 buildings, 2 separate buildings, one for theory and the other for practice, and whether such structures would be integrally attached as wings to Hammond Hall. Questions arose such as, was the rather modern style of architecture used in Hammond Hall offensive to Mrs. Perkins? And just how committed was she to a modified Georgian style of building, etc.? The final version of this document recommended that the Shepard School of Music be fully activated during the years 1963 to 1967 in 4 stages, each spelled out according to its budget, number of faculty, equipment purchased, etc. Hammond Hall was to be the core, with its auditorium seating 500 and its unsurpassed acoustical qualities. I don't know why that brings such a laugh. But the Georgian buildings were still in play, perhaps separated from Hammond Hall by some little distance. I should insert here, while the acoustics of Hammond Hall are excellent for the spoken word, they are certainly not for music. Fields of instruction were to be theory of music, history and literature of music, musicology, and possibly the exciting new realm of electronic music, which has been explored at Columbia University and elsewhere. The teaching of instrumental and vocal music was to be more or less incidental, in addition to the regular assignments of the faculty. However, some thought was given to such instruction on an accredited basis. Some additional Texas musicians might be hired as part-time lecturers, paid a relatively small retainer out of the departmental expense account, and in a phrase all too familiar to musicians, but their recompense largely would accrue in professional prestige. However, the department continued to function on a limited basis until the 1970s. Only after Mrs. Perkins' final bequest, which brought the Shepard School's endowment to about $6 million, including interest, did President Norman Hackerman begin a search for a director for the new school. Among the candidates was Robert Shaw, the well-known American conductor and choral master, who was considering resigning from his position with the Atlanta Symphony. But in spite of a flurry of effort, according to Ann Holmes in the Chronicle of March 13, 1972, he announced his intention to resume leadership of that organization. University officials also spoke with Wilfrid Mellors, distinguished British musicologist, and Walter Handel, American conductor and teacher, but without finding the right candidate or the right proposal for the thrust of the school. Thus, the immediate activation of the Shepard School was put on hold until 1973, when the young composer-conductor Samuel Jones was appointed director, then dean of the school. With Jones's appointment, the modern era of the Shepard School of Music began. With his administrative assistant, Gloria Weems, a longtime Rice employee who knew the ins and outs of the university well, he began planning. The first faculty members were hired in 1974. Paul Cooper, composer, Ronald Patterson, violinist and concertmaster of the Houston Symphony, and myself, musicologist and pianist. Shortly after, we were joined by the eminent flutist and pedagogue, Albert Tipton, and his wife, Mary Norris, a wonderful pianist. During that year, we developed a then unique 5-year curriculum in which the students would, at the end of 5 years, have both a master's degree and a bachelor's degree in music, with Rice's distribution requirements spread out over the 5 years. Of course, we had to convince the Rice faculty that this would work, not always an easy task. After a year of planning the curriculum, teaching non-major students, and the addition of several new faculty, the Shepard School officially opened its figurative doors in September 1975 with 23 students. Samuel Jones conducted the Houston Symphony in the old auditorium downtown to officially inaugurate the school. With the support and encouragement of President Hackerman, Jones's vision for the Shepard School was to make a music school of the first order embedded in a renowned university. Rather than worrying about Georgian architecture at first, he wisely chose to concentrate energies and resources on a compelling program with outstanding faculty. An important philosophical tenet was his desire to join scholarship with performance, to present a complete outlook to our students from the theoretical, historical, and practical sides of music, and we still hold to this philosophy. And from the start, he made clear his intention to focus the practical instruction on orchestral studies, in which the school now excels. Financially, we were a cost center at first, probably a good move for a while, for it helped ease fears that the Shepard School would disadvantage other departments. But as the school grew and more funds were needed for faculty and equipment, the Shepard School was eventually folded into the university budget. One of our early problems was the music library. It was a small recreational lending library, not at all suitable for a degree-granting school of music. It was first presided over by a man from Germany who clearly had some strange leanings. He had a sign over his lending cubicle that said, Der Führerbunker. Upon examination of his claim to have a degree from the Berlin Free University, it turned out they never heard of him. He was quickly replaced by Ralph Hollabaugh, a fine music librarian, who began to build a suitable library for an undergraduate degree in music. At first, only Shepard School funds were used, but it is very costly to start a music library almost from scratch, with adequate recordings, scores, journals, and books. Eventually, the music library became part of the Fondren Library budget. From the start, our goal was to have a faculty that worked together in a collegial spirit, not always the case in highly departmentalized music schools. The early spirit of the small faculty was wonderful. Everyone did everything. Professors heard each other's student lessons. Besides teaching music history classes, I myself taught piano, accompanied student recitals, and had the honor of performing the school's first full student recital with a cellist, John Burton. One of the key events was the hiring of Ray Flegel, longtime concertmaster of the Houston Symphony, whose knowledge of symphonic string music was legendary. Also, the hiring of 2 members of the Lyric Arts Quartet from the University of Houston, Wayne Krause, violist, and Shirley Treppel, cellist. Along with Patterson and Flegel, they formed the Shepard Quartet. Unfortunately, this decimation of the Lyric Arts Quartet caused a major rift with the U of H, which took years to heal. During this time, other key faculty were hired: Paul Ellison, double bass, Ellsworth Milburn, composer, later Clyde Holloway, organ. Shortly after came Arthur Gottschalk, composer, Jeffrey Kurtzman, musicologist, who with his wife Kathy was co-master of Baker College and still much beloved by students from those years. Marcia Citron, musicologist, Richard Brown, percussionist, later Norman Fisher, cellist, and his wife, Jeannie Kerman, pianist, Brian Connolly, pianist, Walter Bailey, musicologist. Many of these have been stalwarts of the faculty for years. One of our former students eventually came on board, Richard Lavenda, composer. We gradually expanded the wind, brass, and harp faculty with part-time performers from the Houston Symphony. Dean Jones also obtained an important professorship in violin, the Starling Foundation Chair of Classical Violin. Judith Shapiro was the first holder of that chair and was eventually succeeded by the internationally renowned violinist Sergio Luca until his untimely death a year ago. That chair is now held by Professor Kathleen Winkler, also a renowned performer and teacher. One of Sam Jones's most important acts was to establish the Shepard Society in 1977. This is the crucial support group of the school, which over the years has provided thousands of dollars in scholarship monies and continues to do so with great generosity. Its members also eventually provided over $1 million toward the total cost of Alice Pratt Brown Hall. Obviously, we did not grow superb student performers overnight. I remember vividly our first orchestra concert. We devised an impromptu stage in the grand hall of the RMC, and on it sat our few string students and all of the string faculty. There may have also been a few ringers from the Houston Symphony. They played Mozart's Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Mozart survived, but only barely. But it was a start. Subsequent orchestral concerts varied in size and success. Some nights, we couldn't get a decent A from the oboe to tune the orchestra. An important group established early on was Syzygy, a still ongoing concert series featuring contemporary composers and their works, performed at first by faculty and later students as well. Where were we on campus? We started out underground in the sub-basement of Sewell Hall, about as close to the water table as one gets in Houston. Susan McIntosh remembers hearing music through the vents when she worked upstairs at night. Indeed, we all heard music and even conversations through the vents. From offices and practice rooms, not ideal for musicians' concentration. Parenthetically, when faculty members were eventually consulted about a new music building, the first things we asked for were windows and soundproof studios and offices. And not only we were down there, but also Dominique de Vigneul stored some of her precious paintings down there. I remember walking out of my office one day and seeing several Magrittes walking by, with Madame de Vigneul supervising the moving of her treasures. We also used the facilities of Hammond Hall for studios, double bass and percussion, and for our orchestral concerts. As mentioned before, the dry acoustics in Hammond Hall are less than favorable for music. To accommodate our growing student body, who needed practice rooms, we resorted to the infamous Wenger practice pods, individual little rooms placed in the basement of Herman Brown. The students complained of bad air in them, and after several hours of practice would have to walk outside just to breathe. Early on, we used the faculty club for recitals, but the piano there was less than suitable. Later, we were given the former nuclear lab, approximately where we are right now, which Art Gottschalk made acoustically possible by an ingenious ceiling design. We used to joke we didn't need to turn on the lights in there, we just glowed from the leftover nukes. Eventually, some of us were placed in the top floor of Fondren Library. As a musicologist, I rather liked that. The Rice Memorial Chapel provided our first organ venue, and eventually Clyde Holloway had keys on his giant key ring to nearly every church in Houston that had a decent organ, where he taught his organ students. We also used Milford House off Montrose, which then belonged to Rice, but now houses the Italian Federation. It had a nice little recital hall. But one morning we found that the Steinway in Sergio Luca's second-floor studio had come partially through the floor, and its legs were hanging above the first-floor foyer. Did we need a music building? It would seem so. Unfortunately, after a few years after the school was started, dissensions began to develop between the faculty and Dean Jones. Some very serious complaints arose from both faculty and students in various areas of the school. Frustration with his leadership grew, partly because of his tight grip on authority and his lack of communication with the faculty. In Jones's own words, he found it difficult to share with the faculty the responsibility for the school that some of them felt in increasing measure was their due. While his original vision remained the central asset of the school, it seemed that he was increasingly unable to administer it effectively. It was as if he had led us to this wonderful adventure, but then didn't know how to move it forward. After a faculty presentation to the provost and president of our problems, and a request for an executive committee to run the school, he realized, again in his own words, that perhaps it was time now for someone who was a professional administrator to assume the mantle. So on December 5th, 1978, he informed the faculty of his resignation as dean. After a sabbatical leave, he returned to the composition department and was welcomed as a very productive member of the faculty. A search for a new dean was begun. Clyde Holloway served as acting dean until Alan Ross, a choral director from Indiana University with administrative experience, came on board. He was a benign, delightful person with a large family, and his greatest contribution was perhaps the healing process that took place. He will also be remembered by many for starting the Christmas madrigal dinners for the Shepard Society, which became a long-standing holiday tradition. He stayed about 2 years, and then Larry Livingston became the third dean of the Shepard School. I served as acting dean in the fall of 1981 because Dean Livingston, who came to us from New England Conservatory, could not arrive until January of '82. Larry Livingston was a talented conductor and musical entrepreneur. His greatest accomplishment, in my view, during his 6 years of deanship was to convince President Hackerman to enlarge the school to achieve a critical mass. This was crucial in order to have a fully and properly implemented orchestra, a fine chorus, strong vocal and piano departments, as well as musicology, theory, and composition. The school had grown from its acorn size, but not enough human or monetary resources were there to bring it to full fruition. This sudden mandated growth spurt was quite painful and created much furor among the Rice faculty, not only because of the expense involved, but because of low admission standards necessary at first to begin the growth. We had many interesting, difficult Rice faculty meetings and were put on probation along with the athletic department for several years. But thanks to the hard work of our admissions directors, especially Gary Smith, now Associate Dean, we were gradually able to raise both the SAT scores and the musical talent, both crucial to the success of the school. Many of our students now rank among the best at Rice. As our students became more numerous, they began to impact the student body in positive ways. Music students living in the colleges began to bring elements of their culture to the campus. I remember the establishment of rug concerts. Student chamber music groups would play in the colleges after dinner. Singers began to populate the musicals presented by the colleges. Perhaps their most important contribution was the interaction with their peers as serious young professionals, dedicated as they must be to their profession. Several curricular problems needed to be solved during the 1980s in order to make us competitive with other schools of music, namely the establishment of a 4-year Bachelor of Music degree and a 2-year Master of Music degree, in addition to the existing 5-year program, and eventually the inauguration of a Doctor of Musical Arts degree, combining the best in musical talent and scholarship. Naturally, all these had to go through the filter of the Rice faculty, often with resistance, but we eventually prevailed. When President George Rupp arrived, he began to hear much clamor from us about a much-needed music building. At a certain point, he called us together in Milford House to give us his views about the direction the music school should go. He told us a small chamber orchestra was just fine, we didn't need large ensembles, and we certainly didn't need a music building. After a moment of stunned silence, we responded, in effect saying, "With all due respect, President Rupp, you are wrong," and began to tell him why, for about an hour. He left, certainly enlightened, and eventually became one of our strongest administrative supporters in the building of Alice Pratt Brown Hall, along with Provost Bill Gordon. In 1988, after the departure of Larry Livingston for the University of Southern California, Michael Hammond became the 4th dean of the Shepard School. He had been president of SUNY Purchase and had built a music building there. Many of you will remember him with great fondness for his personal magnetism and mesmerizing eloquence. He was a true Renaissance man of many talents and interests, from medieval music to the ragas of India, and was much beloved by all who knew him. Each of us who worked with him will have many stories to tell and many private memories as well. He immediately began to make important additions to the faculty, and with the blessing of the administration, began planning a music building and raising funds for it. By this time, Georgian architecture was out of the question. He began building up the scholarship fund so we could compete with the best schools for students. He established our first gala fundraiser, bringing in his personal friend, pianist Andre Watts, later a similar magnificent event with mezzo-soprano Cecilia Bartoli. He designed the new building, working closely with Spanish architect Ricardo Bofill, and brought it in for $20 million. It didn't have everything originally planned, no choral rehearsal room, no music library, only a black box opera theater. But it was built, and in 2 wings, according to his plan, for a meditative private study wing and the public wing for performances, with lovely courtyards in between. Due to his experience with the SUNY Purchase building, he knew what pitfalls to avoid. For example, the 60-cycle hum of fluorescent lights, which are disturbing to musicians' ears in studios and practice rooms. All the ballasts were placed outside in the hallways. Also, 2 or 3 thicknesses of sheetrock were placed between studios for nearly absolute sound isolation. The brass studios got extra thick walls and doors. The slight curvature of the facade facing campus, with lots of windows, avoids a strictly rectangular shape of the studios inside, making for much better acoustics within. The beautiful performance halls are acoustically perfect, controlled with banners that can be raised or lowered according to the size of the ensemble. The organ room, 80 feet high, has the acoustics of a cathedral nave. And the magnificent organ, designed by Clyde Holloway in the French classical style, is one of the jewels of the organ world in this country. Among the crucial appointments made by Dean Hammond was Larry Rapleff, our prized orchestral conductor and teacher, who came to us in 1994 after a series of part-time conductors for our orchestral program. He began the development of the orchestras to an astonishing level, evident to anyone who attends either the chamber orchestra or the symphony orchestra concerts. Dean Hammond hired several other renowned faculty, most of whom are still with us. On his watch, the unique string quartet program was inaugurated, where we bring in already formed young string quartets for intensive training by our string faculty and a master's degree in string quartet performance. Unfortunately, as many of you know, Michael Hammond fell victim early on to pancreatic cancer, with which he lived for 11 years. He was at death's door several times, but always revived. We began to think he was immortal. During the summer of 2001, he was asked to consider becoming the director of the National Endowment for the Arts. He was beginning to feel he had done all he could for the Shepard School, that it was well set on a path to success. Especially after the events of 9/11, he devoutly wished to make a contribution to the country in the form of its culture, much needed in those awful days. He accepted the position after Senate approval, traveling to Washington in January of 2002, and he died 6 days later. The faculty and students, indeed the entire Rice community, were shocked and saddened beyond measure. I was appointed interim dean, a position I held through July of 2003. Somehow we kept the faculty together. The vultures descended quickly for our star professors. Due to the loyalty of the faculty and the strong support of Provost Levy and President Gillis, we managed to pull the school through a very difficult time. In those 19 months also came the Houston Symphony strike, which severely affected several of our wind and brass players, and the parking crisis, when the university decided to charge for parking at concerts. What an uproar. During that time, Gary Smith, Michael's assistant then associate dean, was my right hand. I could not have managed without him. We were able during that time to hire some essential faculty in winds, brass, musicology, composition, and voice, and kept several crucial faculty members from going elsewhere. And we continued the enhancement of what would become the Rice Electroacoustic Music Lab, begun early on by Arthur Gottschalk, fulfilling the prescription from the 1960s mentioned earlier. After a long search for the fifth dean, we brought to the campus Robert Yekovich, former dean of music at the North Carolina School of the Arts. Dean Yekovich is a composer with graduate degrees from Columbia University. As noted by President Lebron at a recent informal talk, not only is he an excellent dean, but also an essential member of the Rice administration. Like Michael Hammond, not only has he found superb faculty talent for the Shepard School, but also for important administrative positions at Rice. Under his deanship, the school began the Kennedy Center concerts, where our best students are invited each year to perform for such musical luminaries as Placido Domingo and Leonard Slatkin. He has enriched the opera program, the last important piece of the Shepard School, with the appointment of Richard Bado as opera director and the securing of the Margaret C. Peck scholarships for voice students. These scholarships provide a unique program available to all graduate student singers, 3 weeks of intensive language and culture study in Florence, Italy. He and his colleagues in the Shepard Society engineered two magnificent galas which featured Itzhak Perlman and Renee Fleming, respectively, bringing to the Shepard School the social elite of Houston and resulting in many additional funds for the scholarship coffers. He established a program with the Library of Congress so our students can do research there and then perform there the results of their research. He has recently made some stunning faculty appointments in organ and violin, professors who will join the school in fall of 2012. During these years, both faculty and students have contributed immensely to the Houston musical scene. The Houston Symphony, Da Camera, Context, Houston Friends of Chamber Music, Musica, Houston Grand Opera, Houston Ballet Orchestra, River Oaks Chamber Orchestra, Mercury Baroque, all organizations which have benefited from the talent of both our faculty and students. Houston's music would not be the same without them. And many of our alums play in orchestras all over America and serve on music faculties as professors or administrators. And so we bring this narrative up to date. I want to emphasize that the current success of the school is due, in addition to outstanding leadership, to the extraordinary talent and dedication of today's faculty and the incredible staff who make the school run smoothly. I cannot mention all their names now, but they know who they are. It is the faculty who attract the best students, who are knocking at our door in increasing numbers. Its usual spirit of extraordinary collegiality, every bit in the spirit of the original faculty, is a crucial factor in attracting prospective faculty to come to Rice and stay. These dedicated individuals have brought to fruition Sally's gift, made in honor of her grandfather in 1950, now one of the jewels in Rice's crown, the Shepard School of Music. Thank you.
On your own questioners?
Oh, sure, whatever.
Sure.
All right.
We'll need to repeat the question.
All right. Are there microphones for them to speak from?
Would you like me to run a microphone?
I don't know. I thought they had them here.
All right. Well, Anne has agreed to take some questions, and because we are taping this, because we webcast, would you wait till I can get a microphone to you so we can hear your question, please, okay?
Any takers? Stephen.
And thank you so much. I mean, the Shepard School is one of the great jewels in the crown of Rice. But the issue that we were concerned about early on, I wanted you to touch on, was that by bringing in such extraordinary musicians, does it do something to the opportunities for amateur musicians in the normal Rice student body to be able to participate as much as they used to be able to before there was a music school with such extraordinary additional talent?
Well, we always had courses for people who were interested in music history, in music theory, in composition. I think we still do, right? And so, yes. And now, as far as the music making, there were also they could take lessons, applied music lessons, usually from by the time we grew to a certain extent, usually from the doctoral students. But nevertheless, they got lessons. And so, yes, I think we kept. And Campanile, oh, thank you. Campanile was the orchestra. And of course, everybody who wants to and has any kind of voice at all can sing in the Rice Chorale. So, yes, I think we covered the bases as well as we could.
I'm wondering if you could comment on the progress of the establishment of an opera building.
I think you'll have to ask Dean Yakovich about that. I don't know much about it. I think it's possibly in the works. That's all I can say. It's fair enough. He's nodding his head. All right. but certainly it's something we would like to have.
Anything else?
You would know about the library, music libraries?
Well, yeah, it exists, and it's in much better shape than it was when we came. That's for sure. I think it supports it supports our graduate programs pretty well. It's growing every day, and we don't have any primary sources as such, or very few. That is, things that you would have to go to maybe someplace in Europe or someplace in the United States to look at. But other than that, I think it's in very good shape.
So there won't be support from PhD?
No, I don't. Again, you'll have to ask Dean Yakovich. My feeling is no.
I don't have so much of a question as I have a comment, just to say that having succeeded or followed Anne, the 18 or 19 months that she served as interim dean, she did an incredible job, and I was fortunate to inherit a school that was in really extraordinary condition, and a large part of that is attributable to Anne's fine leadership. So I wanted to say that.
Thank you. Thank you. It wasn't always a pleasure, but it was fun.
All right, so maybe with that, we will invite you out to our reception. We'll thank Anne so much for a wonderful talk that has allowed a lot of us who weren't familiar with all the ups and downs of the Shepard School's history to share that information. And believe me, I think we all understand what it must have meant for the curriculum to get passed through the faculty. Now, you were very nice in alluding to that, but as someone who is facing a vote on a curricular issue tomorrow, I know only too well what that entails. So thanks to Anne for the talk, for your leadership, and for this wonderful insight into the development of the Shepard School. And I thank you all for coming, and invite you to come back in January when Lisa Sparrow will be talking about the future of the digital humanities. So thank you, and please join us at the reception. Thank you, Susan.
This program is protected by copyright and may not be redistributed in whole or in part without the express written consent of Rice University Digital Media Services.